Are we working?
We're working.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Graham, how are you?
I'm great. Anthony, how are you?
I'm doing good. Doing good. So, so welcome, everybody. So I think, this is an hour-long conversation, and maybe at some point you get to participate a little bit, but the one thing I'm saying, the punchline is I really do want you all to go out and buy the book, all right? Because I think, and so I just want I want you to laugh about this, because he just said this to me. You really read the book.
You did, and we've been preparing for this talk, and Anthony was sharing some of the questions that he has, and it's like, oh wow, you really dug into this and took notes. Like I'm really impressed, and I'll say that I'm really excited about this conversation.
I got excited from reading the book, and I think that you all should read the book because you don't need another climbing book, right? You don't. You do not need another. I will tell you, you probably don't need another climbing book, right? But I do think you do need another book about someone's life that actually teaches us the stuff we need through climbing. And I think the thing that I'm really always taught, I think outdoors is the perfect space for us to find ourselves. You know what I mean? That again, in terms of those experiences that we can offer for our children, our families, where we can see ourselves grow. And, outdoors does that over and over and over. And I think that, and actually what I think is that the real intensity and the extreme nature of the adventures that you are embarking on and doing this actually makes it happen at an accelerated level. And so everybody, Graham is very young, by the way, everybody. You want to?
I'm 37. Actually, I turned 38 day after tomorrow.
Okay, how many of you said, yeah, that's really young? Yeah, thank you very much. So, but we're going to start off. We have a short video that we want to kick this off with, and then we'll get into our conversation. Cool?
Love it.
Okay.
When I started climbing, I experienced a sense of freedom and challenge unlike anything else in my life.
It's my birthday. I'm 24. Getting old.
It was more than the muscular strain of pulling myself up steep terrain.
There's Graham leading the first pitch.
Something closer to blood in my mouth after a fight I had never experienced.
Pretty cool.
It felt natural and pure.
Rock and roll. Go for it. We love you.
Every step up the glacier was one step further into a secret the mountains kept to themselves. All I needed to do was learn, improve, and to survive. In a life in which I never, in a traditional sense, found God, the high mountains are places that for me represent the holy. The practice of climbing has been the thread that has wound its way through my life. It has been a handrail on which I have relied to keep me steady through turbulence. It has been a bearing to follow when the flow of my life has been tranquil.
Love this.
My life in the mountains has been a love story, as I have followed my heart into their depths and into the arms of an amazing romantic partner. It has also been a story of endurance, as I have persevered to summits and through the seemingly endless slog of a career fighting the climate crisis.
When it comes down to it, we need systemic action in order to solve climate.
And it has been a story of heartbreak due to the loss of partners and friends who are attempting to define the cutting edge of what it means to be a climber and a human. I have wondered if a balance between a marriage, a career, and climbing in the big mountains was possible. And if it was, what was the point? Why did it seem so important? Where should that line be drawn? Far away from so much that I love. I loved climbing just as much as I needed to ensure that I came home in one piece. I scolded myself for decisions that nearly killed me. I vowed to learn from them, to keep my mind and body sharp. With my body rigid and my breath held, I closed my eyes. I felt my existence shrink to a single point as I opened my eyes, placed my faith in an axe tip hooked over a fringe of rock, and moved up, silently repeating precision, strength, patience, until I lost myself in the methodical pattern of movement, thought, and breath. I was rubbed down to my raw essence. My soul was exposed. This is what you came for. This is what you yearn for. This is everything you want.
If you want what?
I stared into the infinite, a place where everything could either end or begin. Ripples of light and shadow, snow and stone extended to every vanishing point until the earth blurred with the sky. I whispered a silent thank you to the mountains, accepting hazy recollections as my only lasting experience. And for me, this is it. This is the fine line.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Yeah.
I'll share that I'm really delighted that we started with that video for this reason. That kind of lets us get climbing out of the way. That right there is where I've spent my last 15 to 20 years, like going hard in the mountains, trying to climb routes that have never been done before, which has been lovely and something we could sit here and talk about for an hour. But I think that as we've been preparing for this talk, Anthony, the subjects we've been digging into are so much more than climbing, talking about the climate component, talking about social justice. And I am really excited for this conversation.
Well, I am too, and I think that the thing that, I've really first pulled from starting to read was really the idea of the much deeper meanings. And one section of the book that I want to start with, because we're thinking about the ways that outdoors influences us, because our goal is how are we using outdoors to build community, right? How are we using nature, winter, those things to build community, and the opportunity of, and one of the sections, and it's pretty early, where you talk about coming back. It was after an injury, right? And I actually wrote it down because it was really like interesting to me, and this is paraphrase, and you can kind of talk into it more, but it talks about what happens is that he is on injury, he gets injured, comes home, and he literally has to stop climbing. But he lands at home, and what happens is he realizes, like, this place is foreign. Like, who are all these people? Like, that's kind of the thing. But I think it talks about, he talks about the spectrum of human condition, and that he was unsure how he was meant to digest it. And actually what you say is you're unsure how you're meant to digest the inequity. Is that how it went? So yeah. Can you talk about that? Because I thought that was actually pretty amazing.
I would love to. So just some more kind of background on what happened in 2011, I was awarded New Zealand Alpinist of the Year, which is kind of a long story. I'm originally from New Zealand. You wouldn't know from my accent. But I'd been given this award, and then right after winning that award, went out to do this first ascent that I thought was going to be great, and I just totally got injured. I broke my shoulder quite badly. I broke my leg. I kind of had a big laceration in my scalp. I was kind of a mess, and I ended up back in Seattle where my parents lived and where I grew up, and I was totally grounded. And this was a point in my life when I was going on 4 or 5 expeditions a year. I was spending a lot of the rest of the time on geophysics contracts in order to pay for that climbing, and that was mostly overseas. And so I was engaging with these kind of what we might call really like wilderness areas all of the time, and I wasn't really spending any time in the urban environment. And to go back into the like living in downtown Seattle and be experiencing the both the wealth in that space as well as the need in that space at the same time was something that was really uncomfortable and something that was cause for a lot of reflection. And it's really interesting for me to think about that now, because I realized that at that point in my life I was going to the mountains because there were a lot of lessons to learn there. There was a lot that I could learn about myself, but it was also insulating me from a lot of the problems that we have in the world around us, and being kind of like forced to then subsequently go spend all this time in Seattle. Like I think I was there for about 8 or 9 months of like physical therapy and recovery, and it was this really powerful learning experience, and just kind of like forced me to reconcile the fact that like I am a part of this society and I do have some amount of responsibility, and it's not something that I can just spend all my time in the mountains and kind of utilize that escapism as something that I lean into, for my entire life.
Right. How old were you then?
I would have been about 25.
And so, you start talking about, and you start also reflecting on privilege and really the ideas of privilege, and then what that means. And so, as you talk about privilege in climbing, how does that start to shift the idea of privilege, what that means in terms of the ability to actually even do climbing, and then does that change the way that you pursue climbing as a pro yet? I mean, because I don't, you hadn't really started using that phrase yet, even for yourself.
Yeah,
right?
I think that, at that point I guess I've always had a job outside of climbing. That was some advice that I got early on. So maybe I've always been semi-pro and still am, which is great. And I think that, but I was certainly early in my career at in that phase. And it's really interesting. I think that when I was younger, I was attracted to climbing because of what it taught me, those things that we just talked about a moment ago. And I went and pursued that wholeheartedly, and in that time I wasn't thinking about the privilege associated with my ability to go pursue mountain climbing, my ability to just kind of like figure out getting a job during a recession, because that was right after the '08 recession, and I had like kind of just found this job in geology, and it paid really well, and I was able to go climbing a lot, and it was like I didn't really think about that relative to like a lot of people having a really hard time. It was kind of classic, like young person, no prefrontal cortex, just kind of like pretty selfish attitude. And the thing that I think that initial inflection point of being injured and subsequently being faced not only with the fact that climbing was something that was very ready to destroy me if I weren't more careful, but also this immense privilege that was demonstrated by the fact that I was going climbing all the time. And that was, I guess, as I think about my story and as I think about this book, and I think about the lessons that are demonstrated within it, it's all about like these inflection points of learning, and that injury was one of the like major initial inflection points for me. It was a moment when I chose that yes, I am going to continue to climb. That is something that I'm going to do. It's something I'm really drawn to. But I'm going to look for a way to do it in which it is not a fully selfish pursuit or only benefiting me and the brands that I work with. Let's look for ways that we can learn and expand in my like influence and perspective, so that it could be something that I like try to make the world a better place through. And it took me a while to figure out how to do that, which is all kind of part of the story. But I think that was one of the initial reflection points where I was like, okay, there has to be a better way, and we have to figure it out.
And so how much how much time passed from there to another point that I think it feels real important in terms of your own development, but like for me in the story, how long until you were talking, was it Kai that you were talking later, where he then, you can tell us, but he uses this phrase, you have to have a 100-year plan. And not a 100-year economic plan, right? But this idea that you have to have a plan to live 100 years and do that inside of climbing, where...
Yeah, I'll share that, like, so I think that one of the things I've been really fortunate about with my climbing, with my career, has been that I have received some really good advice over the years. I've had some really, really strong mentorship. And that's all part of privilege, right? Like, I was surrounded by folks who had really good advice for me, and they were willing to spend the time and the energy to share that with me. And so one of the goals in working on the book was to share and kind of contain that advice that has been provided to me, that guidance. And one of the things that is I'm really proud to be able to share within the book was some advice that came from Kai Bune, who was and still is a very close friend. And when I was about 25, right around that same time, actually, it would have been, I got injured at the beginning of 2011, and that's the first. There are like 3 bad injuries in the book, but that's the first of them. But I think it was less than a year later that Kai and I had that sit down that you're talking about, and I was at a trade show desperately trying to get sponsored. I had this goal that I was going to be a pro athlete. I was going to be a sponsored athlete. I had been like written up in Climbing Magazine. I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be easy. And it turned out to like not go very well. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody really wanted to like meet with me, let alone give me free shoes or whatever. And but I like sat down. I did get to sit down with Kai, who was somebody who I already knew, and he did give me a backpack, which was kind, but he also, more importantly, gave me this really good advice around what you referred to, the 100-year plan. And it's this idea that any decision that I make or we make in the mountains should guide us towards living to be 100 years old. And as a 25-year-old who was just hell-bent on going climbing and climbing really hard, it was pretty contrary to a lot of the way I was thinking. I was looking at each expedition as like, this is my chance to make it. This is my chance to make a mark. And it put a lot of pressure on me to like perform. And the thing that Kai was portraying was, listen, the thing that you're doing is climbing a lot. It's clearly what you love. And if you survive, you will do a lot more climbing. And that's kind of like, that was like the basic equation. It was like, that really resonated with me as a 25-year-old. Was like, if you don't die, you'll climb more. And it's like, oh yeah, great. And it's expanded though to become this idea of lifting your gaze from any specific objective and looking at a career of climbing or a career of climate advocacy or advocacy in general, and thinking about the long view, planning for more time in the mountains, more opportunities to take action, but recognizing that it is not always the time for action, that we have to like keep our powder dry and be able to like perform when things are right, but also say no when things are not right. And learning how to balance that risk effectively is crucial to having a long and as well as like influential career, whether as like a climber or as an advocate or whatever.
Right. Well, at the time though too, that I think when you're getting like even the week, it is funny. You have to read the story for the weekend because it includes bad dancing. That's just like teaser. This story includes bad dancing. You should do that. But I think the other thing that when you're describing it though, you are very prefrontal cortex. Right, I mean, that in terms of the climbing and the muscularity of it, you know what I mean. The how are you doing that? And so this starts to kind of be a shift in the way that you're thinking on that too. And I think the thing that for us, and so a lot of the work we're doing in urban communities, and one of the things that I just kind of shared, climbers were dying young. I mean, that was another thing, that there were the people around you were dying young, and with this very short view of the opportunity. What life offered, the idea of visualizing being a 75-year-old climber, whatever that meant, there didn't seem to be much of it. And one of the things that we see and in terms of this period where you come back to the city as well, is at the same time there's something happening in the urban community. And for me, what I was really tying it to is the loss of young black male life. That it was that in some regards it was really interesting that these climbers in the woods are having a similar kind of calculation, right, around what I will do today, right, based on an expectation or based on the value of this moment in anything. And without that 100-year plan, that happens. And so, I hadn't kind of put it in those terms, but even after reading that, I kind of threw that at a few people to think about. And what I got was that that really was a thing, that was really a thing for people in urban situations, people living, challenging times. Another community where there's challenging times, young white men in Appalachia, without economic future. There's this way where that happens, so that 100-year plan seems really well placed for a 25-year-old with all that going on. And so, of course you hadn't considered that piece of it, but how does that fall on you as you kind of come back to Seattle, look at the last 20 years of life and things that have been kind of impacted your thinking,
Yeah, so I think it's worth sharing that. So Anthony and I, just before this talk, we went and visited the George Floyd Cemetery. And
Say Their Name Cemetery.
Say Their Name Cemetery, sorry. Which was a place that I hadn't been before and was really powerful. And we were discussing the 100-year plan as something that maybe we need to teach or bring to a broader community than just climbers, while standing in an art installation that was talking about people who had lost their lives due to police brutality at a very young age, and all their ages are listed on the gravestones that are part of that memorial. And that's something that it's really powerful. It's something I've been thinking about a lot since you and I had that initial discussion. And I think that I have a lot of thoughts about it that we could dig into, and I guess an easy place to start is one of the purposes for writing this book was to I have lost a lot of climbing partners over the years, and I've lost a lot of kindred souls and folks who, I say this in the kind of preface that folks who I think would have maybe been better suited to write this book than me, if not for their loss while climbing the mountains. And when I think about that, I think a lot about the potential that was lost with those individuals. And that's the same thing that we were discussing while standing at the Say Their Names cemetery, was the amount of potential lost. And if those folks, it's and this is an imperfect statement in a lot of ways, but if those folks had the opportunity to live longer, if they had been presented with the idea of a 100-year plan to make, decisions that allow for them to live longer. I say it's imperfect because a lot of the death that is represented there is not due to their decision making, but due to others. But the loss of potential that is captured within that cemetery is captured within that loss is something that is. It's a lot to take on. I think you brought up that it's 4,000 years of lived of life lost, which is a lot of time to do a lot of really good work. And so the idea of encouraging people towards decision making where they manage risk in a way where they're able to take enough risk to learn. For me, risk is a really important part of my life. I'm certainly not an advocate for living a totally risk-free life, obviously, I guess. But doing so in a very deeply considered way, and having that longer view for living to be 100 years old, finding ways to really bring that perspective to a broader community is something that I think is crucial. And the framework that you brought up around that, Anthony, is something that I'm still kind of reeling from, and also really delighted that that's something that for me has been couched in climbing could actually have an impact for a much broader audience.
Yeah. And I think that part of what we're doing is we are trying to put people in spaces where they have an expanded sense of their own possibility, so people are taking different measures around risk. And more importantly, creating opportunity. And I think that that's the part that I appreciated in the book when you talk about privilege. And what that allows you to do is that's one of the other social injustices, you know. And I think that it's tied to climate injustice. And as we talk about climate solutions, I do think that you begin to lay out something really important around the way that we will approach climate change. So I mean, I think that's where there's a connection as well, you know, as we do that.
Yeah. So, and something that you and I were starting to talk about earlier that I think is this group will be really interested in is there's this argument that's kind of showing up within, this is more in the economic space than in the climate space, but they're deeply related, of course. And it's presented by this woman, Dr. Heather Bushey, who is an economist who wrote it. This all contained really well in a book she wrote called Unbound. But it's basically an argument from a well-respected economist as to why equity and inclusion are crucial to the continued success of the American economy and economy in general. And a lot of that is focused around the idea that in order for us to continue to innovate, in order for us to continue to grow, continue for us to do better, we need more ideas and we need more perspective. And we've really we know a lot about the ideas and the perspective of like white dudes in this country. And like when we look at the leaders in the tech space, when we look at the leaders in a lot of different industry, particularly over the last 100 years, like very well represented. But if we're going to innovate more, if we're going to bring in more ideas, we need more folks from different backgrounds with different lived experience in order to like bring their ideas into the fold. And that's this place where climate and innovation and social justice all come together into this like really amazing nexus of like, it's not something that is like some sort of charity, or it is not something that is some form of like, oh, this is the right thing to do, so we should do it. It's like actually like what we need to take on in order to like get where we want to go as a society.
Yeah, no, and I think the other thing, you know, about perspectives, I think even in terms of your experience too, one of the ideas of different perspectives, like even as we solve these challenges, one of the perspectives that happens that you talk about is the way that the perspective of the artist and the creative shows up in your life and then the value that brings. And so maybe you can speak to that as well, because I do think that I've learned that's something that I've tried to do, right? And I'm a scientist in my training of First Life as well, but artists and the presence of the artist is critical to what we want to do. And so you can speak to your experience with that.
Totally. So I'll share that my background, academically speaking, is in glaciohydrology, how water flows.
You guys didn't see that coming, huh? You thought he worked at REI.
Surprise.
Tell the truth.
This guy's real into glaciers. That's awesome. So that's what my background is in terms of academics, and I'll share that I went to school overseas, which was awesome. But it was kind of like I was more educated in like the Oxford system rather than the more kind of liberal arts system in the United States, and so I didn't have a lot of training in terms of like creative thinking or artistic thought or how to be creative. Generally, things were framed up in terms of the scientific method and methodology and rigor with numbers and data, and that was something that I really loved for a long time. But I had this very close friend, Nick Nyman, who another person who like his advice is something that's contained within the book that is like had a really positive influence on me. And Nick, when we were first hanging out, had just finished a degree at from the Art Institute of Chicago in fine art photography. And we were hanging out, and I just thought his whole scene was super squishy and like lacking rigor. And I found it kind of
You've never
annoying.
heard that before, right? I see one artist in the back, he's like,
and it was this thing where it kind of made me uncomfortable. It was something I didn't understand, and I really liked my scientific kind of spreadsheets and whatnot. And him and I spent a lot of time together, and it was after we actually lived together. We've actually lived together a couple of times, and And after a lot of that time together, I came away with a deep appreciation for creative perspectives, for how we can bring people in with stories and how we can engage with storytelling, not only as like with our words, but also with our, with our art, with photos, and how we can do that in order to bring people in, how we can utilize that to like inspire, get people to like take action. And it's been something that's been a really, really positive part of my journey as a climber, and also getting more and more into the advocacy space over the years.
So the other perspective that shows up in your life, and I'm going to just call it like the feminine, the power of the feminine in this. One, it shows up actually in a very funny way, which is, what is with the advice columnist on dating that you? So,
all right, I'm happy you brought that up. That's funny. Okay, so
I actually read them.
So I had met this woman Shannon, and she's now my wife. So kind of like that. So it did work out, which is great. And but I was like, okay, I would like to be with this person. I also want to go on expeditions, but I need to like learn how to be a good partner. And so the thing that I decided to do was bring a bunch of Dan Savage podcasts onto an expedition with me. And if anybody here isn't familiar with Dan Savage, he's based in Seattle. He's a sex advice columnist who it's all about kind of anything goes and nothing is out of bounds in terms of things you can ask him. And so it was like on this glacier, just listening to like really super open-minded advice around how to be in a relationship. And that was I had a series of trips where it was like, okay, I can do both. And I think Anthony, I think it kind of worked. And I'll share that I think going into that relationship, I was ready for anything.
No,
And,
I think it worked because I also knew the outcome. But I do think, and one of the things that shows up, there is a value you have around a relationship, because even before that, there's a loss of a relationship, and there's something that I see around, but it's very specific to, and with Shannon, and I'm just saying that the influence, and I think, and I'm saying of the feminine because it balanced out what you all. It's kind of not just a creative perspective, but this idea of the feminine and the approach, and then her advice and what she was like. Even with that, you kind of moved away from the traditional way where everybody else just had a girlfriend who was along for the ride. Like you were the center of the tension. They shaped their lives around you, or what I mean, around a climber. But this was different. Yeah. Like she was like a strong whole person with a life. And so Dan, so it worked. Yeah, I'm gonna say that. But I do think that there just seemed to be something around the influence of it that as you go through the book, I just see it kind of emerging. And again, I just kind of putting that frame on it around the feminine, because the other thing you talk about is balance. And so how do those perspectives, how do you come to this idea of balance? And even with Shannon, how did you guys stay together? What did you do?
Well, I think that, so let's see. I'll start with you talking about like if for lack of a better way of stating it, like me bringing a feminine or the feminine into my life. And I think that it's really interesting to have you state it that way, and seeing that you see that show up as a theme throughout the rest of the book after Shannon and I meet, that's something I really love to hear. I'll share that something I really tried to do was with each kind of like era of my life to really spend specific time with like the journals and the videos from that part of my life, so that I could really kind of capture who I was, and hearing that maybe like in the earlier sections there was not a lot of the feminine within my life, which is true. There was a lot of me sleeping in tents with a bunch of dudes trying to get up hills, and that like you feel like that was something that was built in as we go along in the story. That really means a lot, actually, Anthony. And I think that the thing that I've learned time and time again in my journey as a person has been, if I can open myself up to influence from other folks, particularly folks that I trust, it tends to be a good thing. Like, I do not have all the answers. And if I want to learn, I need to go out and look for them. And if there's one thing in life that I value above just about anything else, it is continuing to learn. That is the reason that I go to the mountains time and time again, because it's a place where I learn a lot about myself and my relationship with space. It is the reason why I've really tried to foster relationships with people that I like the way that they're getting out the world. And when I think about my relationship with Shannon, who's now my wife, and has been for a bunch of years now, I learn from her every day that we're together. And she holds me accountable. She's very supportive of me and like the things that I want to pursue and the perspectives that I'm chasing around. But she definitely holds me accountable. She doesn't put up with my shit, and that's something that's had a lot of value for me. And something that when I talk to other climbers, particularly younger ones, there's this kind of pervasive narrative that's been in the climbing space for a long time. That's some blend of like Nietzsche and Stoicism of like you have to be focused on climbing as the only thing that you do with your life, and anything in your life that is not, in service of your climbing is waste of energy and making you a lesser climber. And that being kind of the Nietzsche side of things. I guess Stoicism is a whole other conversation. But I've found time and time again that by allowing more influence into my life outside of just kind of the core climbing narrative, it enriches my life, it enriches my climbing. It has, in fact, made me a better climber. I would argue all day that being with Shannon has made me a better climber. Mm-hmm. Not because she climbs. Shannon doesn't climb at all, but because of the perspective that she's brought to my life. Same with the advocacy work that I've been taking on. It has made me a better climber because it's created more purpose within my climbing. And that's ultimately like one of the things I'm really excited to share with the book for younger folks getting into climbing or anything else that they're really passionate about, is this idea that like by being a sponge for ideas and information and influence, while also, you have to be really careful with what that influence is, of course, but by being a more like whole person, you can achieve more in those things that you're really dedicated towards.
Yeah. Well, and I think that when that period where you are committed to that, I think one of the things you refer back to is, it's just interesting how the value of that relationship starts to guide like choices. Like, the potential loss of that starts to guide choices, as well as the potential value, because I think there are other ways where the perspective and the knowledge, like at first, just training in general is one of the ways that it seemed like there was a major influence there in terms of just how you trained, what it means. And you trained differently, you got better results. You ate differently, you start to do that stuff. And I'll just say there's a really strong period of self-reflection. And then you do kind of come out actively around advocacy, right, in terms of why that's important. How has your advocacy shifted since that first, decision to make that part of what you were going to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I first started climbing, it was something that I wanted to do, and it was something that I wanted to engage in and see how far that I could take it. Like a very kind of, traditional kind of athlete model. Like this is something that I'm gravitating towards. I'm going to see how good at this thing I can get, and that's something that has gone really well. I've won the gold medal of alpine climbing. It's gone great, but when advocacy was something that was kind of introduced to me as a possibility, it was really this sea change in terms of how I looked at my role as a community leader. And I think that for a lot of us, is something we talked about a little bit earlier, for a lot of us going outside, getting out into nature, going and exerting, whether we're Nordic skiing or we're just hiking or whatever, is a place of release, a place of escapism. And that's something crucial that green spaces and natural spaces afford us. But also within those spaces, we can learn these lessons that we can bring back with us and can be some of our primary tools for creating the change that we need in the world. And that's an idea that was introduced to me Mostly by two organizations, mostly the American Alpine Club and Protect Our Winters. American Alpine Club really asked me to step up and be a leader in the climate community, while Protect Our Winters said, "Hey, listen, we think you should be a climate advocate." And I'll share that when Protect Our Winters came to me with that suggestion, I was like, "Wait, do you know how much time I spend on airplanes? Like, I shouldn't be advocating for climate. Like, of course, I have a background in glaciology. I know that it is a thing. I know it's something we have to deal with. But I feel like my life is pretty antithetical to climate advocacy. And what they really brought me into was the idea that, like, as somebody with a platform, it was my responsibility to take on some form of advocacy with these stories that I have from the high latitude, high altitude parts of the world, places where we are seeing really, really dramatic shifts in terms of climate. Also, the idea that we don't solve climate just through personal action. We do it through systemic change, through policy, through working with corporations. And as somebody who has a platform, as somebody who could bring people together to lead movements around that, moving towards that systemic change. And that being something that we really need, not only because we need to, like, change the systems, change the corporations, they are some of the, like, primary polluters, but also it really brought me into this idea that personal change when it comes to climate is something that's really expensive. It costs a lot of money. And there are a lot of people in this country and on this globe who do not have the resources needed to buy solar panels or buy an EV or buy an induction stovetop. And that means that when we talk about personal change, it's this conversation where, if you can afford an EV and you can afford solar panels on that home that you own, like, great, you should do that. But if you don't, then you just, like, turn the heat off and, like, turn off the lights and, like, try to grow carrots in the backyard and, like, see how that goes. Like, it creates this really challenging social equity problem. And the way that we get around that is through systemic change, where we can bring everybody along on this clean energy journey together and improve everybody's lives through the advent of clean energy, which means that we have not only clean air, clean water, but also, like, energy security and more jobs. And that those things have really turned into a lot of the motivation that I've brought into what has turned into a primary role for me these days, which is in climate advocacy, and then also empowering other professional athletes in the outdoor rec economy in order to use their voices in order to drive that systemic change that we need.
With the outdoor rec economy, and I think that's part of it too. I think one of the elements that it seemed influential for you is that these these amazing adventures and experiences are happening in places in the world with people that are most impacted by it, and that the economy, the benefit of the economy to them is important as well. Like, so there's a challenge. If there is more climbing, on K2 and K6, and what's happening there, those people begin to live better and do additional things. If you, just how that happens. How do we do both of those things? And you actually have an interesting experience of your work, as a geoscientist in terms of what's happening there. I mean, there's the parts of the world where that's emerging. There's a lot going on there, whether it's in Eritrea and that part of the world, or in Alaska, right, or on the oceans, around South Africa. What's happening? There's a lot going there. And the climbing that's happening in other parts of the world, where there's Kilimanjaro, or, like I said, in Pakistan. So as we promote those things, and we're looking for climate solutions, which I do think that this event, we're choosing climate solutions, right? Not, we're very specific about that. What are some of the climate solutions that we can bring, that you can bring for both of those, kind of differing communities that are part of this right now? Yeah,
I'll start. I will get to an answer to your question, but just to kind of go back a little bit to that, what feels like kind of a decoupled perspective that I had for many years of, like, taking on climate and going to these mountains and these things being two different things, or the idea that when I was younger, I kind of came into advocacy, and I felt like I needed to choose what the thing I was going to be an advocate on was, and I chose climate because I knew a lot about it, and I thought that meant that, or like kind of in my decision making at the time, it was like, okay, that's where I'm going to focus my energy, and then there are other people who are working on the other issues that are going on around the world, and we can work together, but like my role is to be a climate advocate, and subsequently the realization that like intersectionality of climate with any number of other issues is actually like where the most potent critical work needs to take place. And that being really captured within an experience on K2 back in 2021 when we were up on trying to make the first ascent of the direct west ridge of K2, and which was a really powerful experience, not because we got to the top, we didn't, but because we failed on that climb or failed to get to the summit because of heat. And I remember sitting up on that climb. We were sitting on this little ledge. It's about half the size of what we're sitting up here on right now, and the mountain is like collapsing around us because of the heat. When those high altitude areas experience heat, it means the snow melts. It means you get avalanches. It means the rock starts falling apart. And so we're just like in this small island of safety with this mountain collapsing around us, and we just can't really go anywhere. Not a great situation to be in, but there we were. And we're looking down valley, and I'm thinking about the climate advocacy work I've been doing. I'm thinking about this climate that we're on. I'm thinking about why it matters. And I really found myself thinking about my dear friend Rasul, who's a village elder in the small town of Hushay up in the high mountains of Pakistan, up in Gilgit-Baltistan. And thinking about how he's somebody who's very worried about climate. He knows that climate change is real. He knows that it's an issue. But he's not somebody who has a vote or a carbon footprint or a platform for advocacy. The things he's doing are like building rock gabions, those like baskets of rock to like try to contain the river flow so if there is a glacial lake collapse that also caused by climate, that it doesn't like wipe out his village. He's working on ways that they can make sure that they have enough water in their village during the later summer in order to grow the crops that they need to survive, because these folks are more or less subsistence farmers outside of the money that comes in from expeditions. And realizing that that the work that I'm doing is as much for Rasul as anything else. It is not so that I can go climbing. Climbing is this thing, it's this place where I learn lessons, it's this place where I gather a platform and I gather these stories to leverage, but like the purpose of my climate advocacy is not to go climbing more. It's not like so that we have better conditions on K2 for sending or something like that. And that was and I think that like those reflection points are so crucial, and you have to really like dig in on those. And so in terms of like you asking about actions around climate, I think that there are some like big things, right? Like we got to vote. We got to like if there are things that are taking place in our, within our political system, we got to call our reps. Like those are like, we live in a representative democracy. Those are things that we like have to do. And just to kind of call it out, we have to vote for viable candidates. And as we look at the next election, there are going to be two viable candidates, and we're pretty unhappy with both of them, but one of them is a lot better than the other. And like not voting is not like a way to abstain or like make a stand. It is just a great way to make sure that we like do not follow the course that we need for this country. Just to like say that. But there's voting. There's getting everybody to vote. There is working to make access to voting easier, particularly in parts of the country where folks are like not really given the opportunity. But then I think also the thing about climate that is so interesting is that it touches each and every one of us, and it touches most of the things that we do, whether that's for fun or for work. And that means that the way that it intersects with all these things means that there are all sorts of actions that we can take. We were just listening to this panel before with representatives from Delta and Target talking about how climate is something that is it's part of the risk management model for these major corporations these days. And that's true for any piece of work that we're taking on or any community that we're a part of. And within that, there is potential action, whether it's at the community organizing level, whether it's at the city or the county or the state level of advocacy or getting involved, working on things like climate action plans within cities, or within corporations or companies that we work for, and thinking about like ways that we can influence the world around us, or ways that we can make sure that we are mitigating that risk to make sure that we're able to like survive and keep doing the work. And I think the fact that the climate is so pervasive and so ever present and touching all of us all the time makes the amount of action that we can take not only like there's a lot of it, but it's also like very personal. Like each of us need to kind of look at the own lever. Each of us need to look for the levers of change that we can operate personally, and like understand what they are, and then get really good at operating them, so we can all drive that change.
Okay, great. Okay, so now what I'm going to do. You all feel good so far? Time flying by. Okay, not a climbing book. You agree?
There is climbing in the book.
There is climbing in the book. So don't get me wrong. So a couple things. I'm gonna just pull a couple of things from the book that I did want you to just talk about this, because there's a lot of notable like one-line things you can pull. So I'm gonna pull a couple and talk about it. One, the leader cannot fall.
So within climbing, the leader is the one who's like putting the rope up. Fall potential for them tends to be much larger than the other members of the party, and it is this like this kind of, it's a really important thing to not fall. Like not only is fall generally it can result in injury, but it also wastes a lot of time. So that's a really important part of the game.
Okay. All right. Great. So here's a quote from the book, and my 13-year-old daughter would very, very much appreciate this. The statement was, "The lip balm was still there."
That's a good follow-up question, because I have to talk about the fact that while leading, I did take a fall, which is what you're not supposed to do. I took this really terrible fall way up on this mountain in Pakistan. Really not recommended. And it was like a 120-foot fall where I ended up just free hanging over the edge of the mountain. And I remember when I was like doing kind of a self-assessment. I was like a ways away from my climbing partners because I'd kind of fallen down the other side of the mountain, and it was really not good. And I'm there like hanging in space, kind of like making sure I haven't broken anything, and kind of expecting to have broken something. And so I'm like making sure everything's okay, and then I realized that my right pocket, the zipper pull, has been ripped off of my pants in the fall, and I'm like, oh, this is broken. I'm reaching in, and my lip balm was still there, and it was like this moment of like, okay, maybe I can get this under control. And I remember this immense relief, being like, well, at least I have my lip balm.
Don't you think that's brilliant? Honestly, like at some point you will be in a life-threatening situation, and you will pull out your lip balm, right? I just, like, seriously, I'm not even kidding. My 13-year-old daughter has a collection of lip balms and counts them. So anyway, I thought that actually that was. So anyway, yeah, that was planned. Those two go together. But it was also part of the story, though, for you. That was also, it was cool to see you get out of that, uninjured and get down, but. In the end, I think when people walk away from reading the book, and when people walk away today, and we really are looking at the ways that we will engage, how we engage outdoors ourselves, the communities of people that we are building as we do this, and as we work towards climate action. And look for climate solutions. How do we use, the perspective of the artists? What do we bring in terms of the feminine, and those that are not always centered in the story? Rasul, what do we do? Because I think the important thing for us is that we do have to leave here with hope, that we can do this, and that really we all have to take an action. And so what are the communities, and how do we get this group to organize their communities, and what advice can we give them to build our communities to get started before November 5th?
Yeah. I love that question. And the thing that really comes to mind is that we need to continue to progress from where we are right now. If anybody was at the concert last night from Tunde Ilarian, I think is right. It was just like, it was part of the Great Northern Festival as well. It was this excellent show from this incredible individual, and they were speaking about how we are climbing this mountain and we are partway up, and the thing that we have to make sure that we do is not back down. We have to keep going in this direction. We have to continue moving forward. We need to continue to be progressive, and we need to continue to progress. And for me, climbing is this place where I have consistently learned lessons, and I've learned things about myself, and I've learned things about the world around me and how I get at it. And when I think about what we need to be able to do in order to continue to progress in the direction that we need to, and towards a more just society that is in better harmony with this planet on which we live, the thing that we need to do is, as a society, continue to learn. And that means that we need to give ourselves space to try new things. We need to bring more people into the conversation. We need to elevate those voices. And we need to give ourselves space to take risks. And I think that strategically taking on risk is one of the most crucial things that we can do, because if we stop taking risk and we stop taking chances, then we're going to start reverting back to the ways that we've been doing things in the past. And that is just not an option. So I hope that ultimately this book and my story and my influence on those around me can be to demonstrate that well-considered risk, strategic teamwork with a group of people who you believe in and you trust can really take us to places where we want to go, even if we don't know quite how we're going to get there. And it's something that I will share. Like, I have a lot of hope, and I feel very positive about the future. I also am feeling very realistic about the fact that it's going to take a lot of work to get there, and it's going to take a lot of voices in the room to get us there. But I think that if we can harness the perspective of those around us and apply some pretty serious effort, that we can move towards that world that we want to live in. And yeah, November is going to be a decisive moment. And that's not to say that if the White House changes hand, that all is lost. It will be a major setback. So. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's we got to keep taking risks. We got to keep moving forward. We got to continue learning, and we got to continue to do that together.
So. Graham Zimmerman, thank you very much. Audience, thank you for participating. Thank you for all the Great Northern Festival that really worked to put this together. Graham will be available. You can get a signed copy, but also at the restaurant downstairs. We'll continue the conversation. Stick around for our next sessions. And please, as you make your way to the next sessions, you can do self-check-in. Also, please consider making a donation to the Great Northern Festival to support our programming. There's a QR code on the screen, or there should be a QR code on the screen, or there'll be one outside. And we have programming today through February 4th. You can join me again on February 2nd at Silverwood Park. We'll be doing an outing. Please come experience that with us, as well as all the things that the Great Northern Festival offers. Please connect yourselves outdoors, and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.